Kia ora koutou. Wonderful to be here, and what an honour it is to be presented with the Storylines Betty Gilderdale Award for 2015. And thank you very much, Libby and Storylines, for making this possible. And to you, Sandy, and Storylines for organising this lovely evening. So, many thanks, really appreciate it. Storylines provides a unique advocacy role in promoting author events up and down the country, helping children, develop a love of literature. And as a representative of IBI, which is the International Board for Books for Young People, Storylines is hosting the 35th IBI International Congress in Auckland in August next year. So it's pretty exciting. It's the first time that IBI has had their big congress in New Zealand. So well done to Libby and your team. It's wonderful to have so many family and friends here. Ellen, I'm sorry, your family too, aren't you? My son-in-law's father is here, so it's lovely to have you as well. And colleagues here tonight, so thank you very much for coming along. And what a week we have had with the All Blacks and the Silver Ferns and a New Zealand horse winning the Melbourne Cup. I was the one who rose early on Sunday morning, so I can claim to be a sports fan. Yet I look forward to the day when we equally celebrate cultural success, and in particular the literary successes of our esteemed New Zealand children's writers and illustrators, who I believe are deserving of similar accolades. As Wayne Mills asserts, the quality of this literature for children stands proudly alongside the best in the world, and I echo that sentiment. Perhaps some of the lack of recognition may be attributed to a nostalgic view of childhood reading and some of the language that describes the genre, such as juvenile literature. We don't really hear senile literature or kiddie lit. I've called this talk Past to Present, Navigating New Zealand Children's Literature, an acknowledgement of a book that made an impact on me. Diane Hebley's The Power of Place, Landscape in New Zealand Children's Fiction, 1970 to 1989, noted the prevalence of seascape in the literature produced for children, hence my nautical tilt. Rather than leave you with the impression, though, of a boat bobbing in the ocean, I'm hoping that by the end of the talk you will see how the current success of New Zealand children's literature floats on the ballast provided by some legendary individuals. So let's start with Betty Gilderdale herself, after whom the Storylines Award is named. Her contribution to New Zealand children's literature, as Libby has indicated, is significant. In my capacity as a teacher-educator, I've long been a fan, since reading her chapter in New Zealand, the Oxford History of New Zealand Literature, which has kind of remained my go-to tome, for many a children's literature class preparation. With convenient timing, the publication of the Oxford History in 1991 coincided with my appointment in the early 90s to the then Dunedin College of Education, where I was employed to cover for Marianne Baxter, and then joined her and Jane Johnson, lecturers in children's literature. So I had great luck. In terms of resources and mentors, as I began a career that was to specialise in children's literature, an area of academic study that was asserting itself internationally as a scholarly area of pursuit. And I have loved my job. Where else do you get paid to read children's books? So where and when did this interest in books emerge? Like many of you, I suspect we were given books for presents and we made excellent use of libraries. Living in rural communities for most of my childhood, we didn't have independent bookshops like the UBS on our doorstep, so libraries were our mainstay, and the Country Library Service played a significant role in matching books and readers. Perhaps some of us had collections passed down through the family, and in my case, my mother had kept all her copies of children's classics, like The Wind in the Willows. So I had at my disposal some elegant examples to issue when playing librarians and teachers. I also, however, have kept several copies of early favourite reads, coincidentally with a focus on animals and very British in orientation. Each of these examples has a 1950s sensibility. And this one here, Tiptoes the Mischievous Kitten, is quite striking in its portrayal of middle-class domesticity. And on the very first page you see Tiptoes, the mischievous kitten, arriving. The family. From Tiptoes' arrival at the Moffat House, a detached two-storey dwelling with a large garden, to her ensuing misadventures, we gain a sense of some of the household activities of the era. Such curiosities as making a feather mattress into pillows. As a child, I could obviously relate to Tiptoes' naughtiness and her desire to be better, but I think I would have drawn the line at Tiptoes' comment. Tiptoes hid herself in the little greenhouse this time and made up her mind to be good. Oh dear, she said to herself, I wish my mother had spanked me more often. The other text is reminiscent of a firm favourite, which was the Millie Molly Mandy series. Some of you may remember. I loved thatched roof cottages. And so the cover of this anonymously published book, and I think they probably didn't want to put their names to it. Oh dear. So the cover of this anonymously authored My Animal picture book would have captured my interest from the outset. Comprises a selection of stories with ill-defined plot structure, featuring children with names like Mary, Betty, Susan and Bobby. They were obedient children living in an idyllic pastoral landscape. And I'll just show you a couple of them. So you can see that I wasn't a very good child. It's scribbled in my books. But this one here, Old William the Bull, is about Jean being told by her father that she wasn't to go into the mushroom field because the bull was there. Of course, this made Jean feel very curious because she had never seen a bull. So as soon as she could, she hurried along and looked over the fence. There stood Old William, the bull. He looked very big, but Jean thought he looked rather nice. But she didn't climb over the fence into the field because she knew that Old William would be dangerous because Daddy said so. There was a young horse racing around the field as well, and for a moment Jean wondered if the bull would attack him. But Old William just raised his head and snorted, and then he went on eating the grass. And all the stories are just like this, you know, they're quite random. Aside from this interesting little one, which is about the geese chase Rags. So Rags is the little puppy, and Betty is, you know, marshalling the geese. And then she gets a little bit frightened of them, and she's very upset, so she calls her big sister Jane, you know, to come to the rescue. And quite curiously, Jane says, you must learn to say boo to a goose. Masculine version. But I thought I just wanted to share some of my early reading. I have to say that I progressed. And I have to credit Rachel with this because she was an avid teenage reader, and she introduced me to a wider range of authors, such as Cynthia Voigt, Lois Lowry, Penelope Lively and Jane Aiken, to name a few. My son Peter, at the same age, was more into The Simpsons and Mad magazine. So the school journal signalled for me a small shift from my British-dominated reading preferences, aside that is from the American series, the Bobbsey Twins, to a more culturally located local context. As Ethel Macready has argued in one of the essays published to accompany the 1991 National Library of New Zealand exhibition, not only the written content, but also the visual aspect of the school journal cannot be overstated. With the educational changes ushered in by the 1935 Labour government, social reform ideology underpinned curriculum revision to align more with prevailing ideas about national identity, and specifically the production of texts that offered New Zealand content. So hitherto, the literature had been fairly Eurocentric, as you indicated, Sandy. So reflecting a privileging of books published overseas, reinforcing the belief for some that anything produced in New Zealand was innately inferior. Post-colonial impulse was still a little distance away. New Zealand publishers and booksellers such as Reed, Paul's and Wickham and Tombs, and of course Dorothy Butler's bookshop, played a significant role in the production and marketing of Indigenous literature for children. These publishers and booksellers and their future progeny provided an impetus for subsequent narratives about culture, relationships and identity. And often it was the school journal that offered an incubator for nurturing talent. So it's worth noting that many early contributors to the visual and written narratives in the school journal were or were to become notable writers and illustrators of children's books. Arguably, New Zealand's foremost children's author, Margaret Mahi, was amongst this group of experimental pioneers, along with Weti Himara, James K. Baxter, Elsie Locke and Janet Frame. Some of the artists included E. Mervyn Taylor, Russell Clark, Deirdre Gardner, Dick Frizzell, Murray Grimsdale, Robin Belton, and most recently Dylan Horrocks. So the school journal was very much an essential feature of my childhood reading, and I suspect many of us who were brought up in New Zealand. As were the instructional readers that we had. And will children who have been to school in the last couple of decades ever forget Robin Belton's Greedy Cat? Such is the appeal of Robin's characterful cat and Joy Cowley's prose that these gems have recently been reissued, so a whole new generation of readers will sample this delight. How privileged we are to have school-issued texts that are written and illustrated by such talented individuals. So I think we have to acknowledge the historic and ongoing importance of the school journal, established all those years ago, 1907. As indicated, it aligned with a new generation of children born in New Zealand who are being introduced to Indigenous publications, often as a result of the advocacy of wonderful teachers and librarians. So it's fitting, I think, that this award is being presented in the City of Literature that has played host to numerous influential individuals who have made their mark in the field of children's literature, such as award-winning Dunedin pioneer of children's lit, Joan de Hamel. The City of Literature also houses the Centre for the Book, based at the university, and next Thursday evening we have Julia Marshall from Gecko Press, this little commercial interlude here, to open our Children's Literature Symposium, so that's up here in the Dunningham room too. I would now like to mention three very early pioneers of New Zealand children's literature whose work is archived in the Heritage Collection just one floor beneath us. Some of the ballast, if you like, referred to earlier. Dorothy Neal-White, Edith Howes and Esther Glenn. And in passing, I'd like to note the connection between English children's writer Eleanor Farjon and Dunedin. Then I'll discuss a significant initiative, which is the Writer in Residence program. And finally, I'd just like to offer some concluding thoughts. Okay? So I'm talking about some luminaries first, then I'd like to talk about the residency, and then finally I'll just finish with some concluding comments. So the first of my selected luminaries is Dorothy Neal-White, who was children's librarian here in Dunedin. A woman of strategy, she remained Miss Neal after her marriage to Desmond White of Newbold's bookshop. Some of you may remember that bookshop. In order to secure continued employment, since it was the policy of the day for women to resign on marriage. Under her stewardship, the children's collection here was recognised for its quality in marketing outreach. The imaginative efforts undertaken by Dorothy Neal-White to promote children's books by way of the social media of the day, reviews, radio broadcasts, etc., were legendary. You've all heard of the 10 best, or the 100 best, if you go past Whitcombs or wherever. Well, Dorothy annotated a list of 2,000 books that assisted library and bookshops' purchasing decisions. Her influence was also felt amongst teachers' college students of the 1940s, when she was librarian at the Dunedin Training College. Not only was she an esteemed librarian, but also an author of distinction. And when my children were young, I remember Books Before 5 became very well thumbed. Her powers of persuasion are reinforced in Mary Atwell's observation, quote, Dorothy Neal-White's lifelong conviction that only the best was good enough for children was matched by her ability to communicate her knowledge and enthusiasm to others, end quote. Dorothy Neal-White remains a pioneer of children's literature scholarship. A second luminary is Edith Howes. Her book, The Long Bright Land, Fairy Tales from the Southern Seas, conveys the idea of creating a new culture in an adopted land. Celia Dunlop, writing for the Dorothy Neal-White collection, asserts, I just love the sound of this, the sound of Edith. Letters from people who knew Edith Howes picture her as a dainty woman with a crown of red gold hair, shining eyes and bright step. She's said to have had a Peter Pan quality, to be not unlike a fairy herself. So Edith was born in 1872. She was a writer and a teacher, and she was recognised for her progressive ideas about education. For example, she succeeded in gaining approval for Montessori teaching methods and persuaded a local Gore firm, very local, to make small chairs and tables that could accommodate 4 children. You'd be interested in this, Judy. An innovative initiative when at that time the usual classroom environment comprised forms and desks. Attention to the classroom environment spilled outdoors with her great love of nature, underpinning much of her writing for children. And her first book, The Sun Babies, published in 1910, was endorsed by Dr. Benham, who was Professor of Biology at the University of Otago. So the accolades that she received, included royal medals and receiving an MBE. Included being ranked in 1926, I find this fascinating, a 1926 Canterbury Public Library survey where she's 4th ahead of Charles Dickens. She undertook amazing research, and I'll just give you a couple of examples of her kind of research journey. First in 1913, she was granted a year's leave of absence and a free government railway pass to research information for her books. Imagine how this early version of sabbatical enhanced her narratives, which offered children's stories set in New Zealand that foregrounded local flora and fauna. As Jessie Mackay has noted, Edith Howe's clothed science in the green robes of Elfinland. And a second example which I find really interesting, this is a description of a night sortie where Edith is going into the bush with her brother George. And George, by the way, was instrumental in establishing the local marine biology centre at Portobello. So, quote, the wee sortie that they go out on, she and her brother. The entomologist said, "Come collecting with me tonight." I watched his preparations. Into a satchel went a brush and a jar of treacle and stale beer mixed. A heady allurement, the sugar of entomologists. Into it went also a chloroform bottle to bring swift and painless death to the captives, with small boxes and tubes to hold caterpillars, beetles, eggs, and a acetylene lamp on his bicycle, and a butterfly net of green muslin with a jointed, adjustable handle completed his equipment. We set off on our bicycles for the nearest edge of the bush. Its scent stole out delightfully as we left bicycles in the setting sun behind us. Through the darkening tracks we walked softly. Dusk deepened, grew stiller, more fragrant. Isn't it an amazing visual picture? You can just see the pair of them out, claiming captives. So these observational skills, reflected in the night excursion, are elaborated further because Heather Murray talks about Edith's book, which is called The Cradle Ship. Now this was reprinted, can you believe it, 18 times, and it's translated into a whole bunch of languages, like French, Italian and Danish, precise. The Cradle Ship was considered something of a revolutionary text, as it loosely embraced sex education. I say loosely, since the description, a silken baby bag beneath the heart, and ensuing narrative obliquely concedes that babies grow within the mother's body and a birth process occurs. And she kind of turns them into flowers. And the flowers are kind of quite symbolic because you have pansies and red hot pokers. But Edith is very interesting in terms of, her role as a critic as well, because her articles for an adult audience assert her feminist interest in encouraging women to assume a higher public profile. Her humour and irony are evident in her comments related to a commission of inquiry into the education of girls. Hearing that the committee had one female representative, she remarked, quote, "The astounding egoism of the men who take it upon themselves to command the future of all the women in this country is only equalled by the astounding apathy of the woman who will submit to the imposition." I was paraphrasing. End quote. Furthermore, Heather Murray informs us that Edith Howe spent the last 13 years of her life in Dunedin, where she wove her old stockings into floor mats, she made her own coffee substitute, gardened and preserved, and ignoring the prevalent taste for white bed linen, she dyed her sheets pink. So that's Edith. So turning now to Esther Glenn, another luminary in the world of early New Zealand children's literature, whose work is represented here in the Heritage Collection. She visited Australia and she developed awareness of their burgeoning Australian children's literature scene. And she was influenced by the novels of Ethel Turner, and you may know one called Seven Little Australians. Well, Esther wrote Six Little New Zealanders. Just to kind of, keep up with the Aussies. Her ear for dialogue and comic detail is evidenced in the lively style of narration. So her name is immortalised in New Zealand's longest-running book award, established in 1945. So she was both a novelist and a journalist. And on a personal note, she was based in Christchurch, and my mother went to Oxford District High School, and Esther was very friendly with HCD Somerset, who was the principal at Oxford District High School, and his sister Gwen Alley was also a teacher there too, and Peg, my mother, knew them, so that was a nice little personal connection. The Lianza Esther Glenn Award, given by the New Zealand Library Association, celebrates the most distinguished contribution to New Zealand literature for children, and this year it was awarded to one of our former writers in residence, Leonie Agnew, for her book Conrad Cooper's Last Stand, which I have been reading to my students. It's a wonderful tale, based in Auckland in 1978 against the backdrop of the Bastion Point protests. So, very interesting story. But the first recipient of the Esther Glenn Award was Stella Maurice's narrative, The Book of Wiremu. Now, I'm just going to skip what I've said about Eleanor Farjeon, because I'm aware that you might be getting a little bit tired. Eleanor Farjeon is an absolute favourite of mine, and you're probably thinking, well, what really does she have to do with being a New Zealand luminary? But she, her father, Ben Farjeon, was the editor of the Otago Daily Times. So if anybody wants to find out a little bit more about Eleanor and her ties to Dunedin, there are some really lovely stories around there. So I shall just right. So now on to the people of the moment, the wonderful writers. Having mentioned several writers whose work is showcased here in the library, I would now like to turn to an initiative that celebrates the success of contemporary writers. These writers and artists have made their mark, and while many live locally, the residency has attracted widespread national interest. It has been an absolute pleasure, undiluted pleasure, to be involved in a small way with the operation of the residency. To give it its full title, big breath, the University of Otago, College of Education, Creative New Zealand, Writer in Residence. Now, just a wee bit of brief background on the residency. For 2 decades, Dunedin has hosted a children's writer in residence. The residency was established in cooperation between the Dunedin College of Education and Creative New Zealand. And when the college merged with the university in 2007, the fellowship was formally included in the Memorandum of Understanding governing the conditions of merger between the 2 institutions. Thus, the writer continues to reside in the College of Education. The fellowship has a long-established national reputation. Many incumbents have won New Zealand's most prestigious award for children's literature, both prior to and subsequent to the residency. The roll call of incumbents reads like a who's who, and thank you, Karen, for providing us with that fabulous list. So I will say, though, that this year we have had the very good fortune to have had Jennifer Beck and Robin Belton as a shared residency, and a small commercial break. Robin's looking a little bit perplexed. No, you're not. Keep a lookout for a soon-to-be-published picture book based on the extraordinary story of Alexander Aiken, a World War I soldier who played his violin in the trenches. Now, what has made the project more poignant is Alexander was brought up on the peninsula and attended Otago Boys High, George. So the local connection enabled Jennifer and Robin to undertake research not only indoors in the Hocken, but also in the field. We eagerly await its appearance. And in 2016, we welcome award-winning author Barbara Else. So there are many people over the years who have contributed to the successful running of the residency. However, I would like to acknowledge one such significant individual who was involved in establishing the residency at the Dunedin College of Education, and that is Anna Marsage. I know it's lovely to have you here this evening. Under her tutelage, the residency gained prominence within the children's literature community. And from its inception in 1992, it has enjoyed uninterrupted occupancy and financial security, thanks to the generosity of Creative New Zealand and the College of Education, now the University. Locating the residency at the college consolidates the college's role in promoting children's literature and in recognising its importance for teachers and students. It is important that teachers know about the books that are being published locally and who the writers and illustrators are. The residency provides opportunities for authors and illustrators to visit schools and take workshops, both in Otago and in our Southland campus too. The high calibre of applicants, drumroll, reflects the residency's ability to attract candidates of literary merit who demonstrate originality, innovation and excellence. A further practical attraction, which you would have to take advantage of, Karen, being local, is the partnership between the Robert Lord Cottage Trust and the University to provide rent-free furnished accommodation for the 6-month duration of the residency. The cottage is quite possibly the smallest dwelling in Dunedin, in the smallest street in Dunedin, not exactly aptly named, ironically named Titan Street. And of course, most of you know where Titan Street is, right in the heart of Student. And so we've had to make sure that we've got double glazing, and not just for the warmth, but the other. And it's been absolutely a gem though, and we've also contacted Campus Watch and made sure that they put the cottage on their beat. So relatively few residencies are available for children's writers and illustrators, and as the only designated children's writers residency, we believe we provide a supportive professional environment that offers collegial exchange with academics and teachers involved in the study of children's literature. We're delighted to continue to market the children's writer in residence alongside the University of Otago's other prestigious fellowships, the Burns, Mozart, Francis Hodgkins and Caroline Plummer. So thank you very much, Anna, as the person who got the ball rolling. It is clearly self-evident that New Zealand children's literature is a force to be reckoned with. Australian novelist Sonia Hartnett endorses this view, although not specifically referring to New Zealand literature, but I'm kind of claiming the comment. In her statement, quote, "I believe that the only lasting, important form of writing is writing for children. It is writing that is carried in the reader's heart for a long time. It is writing that speaks to the future." End quote. New Zealand children's literature enjoys international stature, and I have personally basked in some reflected glory at international conferences when just by being a New Zealander and coming from the land of Margaret Mahy, Joy Cowley, Lindley Dodd, Morris Dewey, Gavin Bishop, etc., etc., and the list could go on, elicits excitement and envy. My research interests in the field of children's literature have recently focused on an historical context. Perhaps I should think Tom might tame a historian for his influence here. And there was such a wealth of material to investigate, as previously indicated in this talk with the fabulous collection that we had here at this library. Currently, I've been researching the experiences of Polish child refugees in World War II, some of whom were relocated to New Zealand. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with this story, in 1944, the New Zealand government accepted 733 Polish children who had survived deportation to the Soviet Union labour camps in Siberia before reaching Red Cross camps in Iran. While many refugee narratives have been produced as a consequence of World War II, few, if any, document the journeys undertaken by families who were evicted from their Polish homeland and deported. Displacement on such a scale underscores the depth of cultural trauma and its manifestations in the selected texts I focused on, two of which were written by our writers in residence. Melinda Schmanik's novel A Winter's Day in 1939, and the picture book Stefania's Dancing Slippers by Jennifer Beck and Lindy Fisher. with recent global events precipitating an increase in the quota of refugees accepted into New Zealand, the first increase in 60 years, I'm aware as a teacher educator that we need a variety of children's books that relate to diverse interests that both draw on and affirm students' social and cultural identities. Some concluding remarks to be relieved. Today we celebrate the diversity of children's books published locally, and New Zealand children's literature goes from strength to strength. Many younger writers have wide teen digital fan bases, and I'm thinking of writers like Lani Wendt, Ella West, Carl Mewburn, Leonie Agnew, Melinda Schmanek, and others. Their blogs attract honest, interactive responses that demonstrate high levels of involvement with vibrant literature. Quality children's literature should above all be engaging, yet it also needs to provide challenge. Alison Lurie notes, quote, "The great subversive works of children's literature suggest that there are other views of human life besides those of the shopping mall and the corporation. They mock current assumptions and express the imaginative, unconventional, non-commercial view of the world in its simplest and purest form. They appeal to the imaginative, questioning, rebellious child in all of us, renew our instinctive energy, and act as a force for change. That is why literature is worthy of our attention and will endure long after more conventional tales have been forgotten." End quote. That was Alison Lurie. Controversy has stalked our landscape recently with issues of censorship, and I refer explicitly to Ted Dawes' Into the River. To put this in context, as long ago as 1950, Brian Sutton Smith's Our Street, published by Reed, became something of a cause célèbre and sparked lively socio-political debate. The novel's edgy social realism was attributed by the author to the influence of reading Stella Maurice's book, the Book of Wormwood, mentioned earlier in the paper, in the talk, to the children at Brooklyn School. Smitty and his friends, who are kind of like South Park characters, are troublemakers with little respect for authority. Like Dawes' narrative, Sutton Smith's text offers a realistic reminiscence of childhood. Realistic narratives such as those mentioned already, and I'm reminded of similar situations of public disdain following publication of William Taylor's The Blue Lawn and Morris Dew's The Fat Boy, graphically portray the complexity of relationships encountered by young adults. With the plethora of competing interests from social media sources, and as literature becomes more broadly defined, it has to connect with readers who are used to navigating digital media. Critical literacy underpins engagement with current multi-literate practices, and texts such as Into the River open avenues for discussion of complex issues within a safe environment. Emma Neal sums this up well in his statement, quote, "I strongly believe literature is one of the places that young people can safely think through situations and rehearse their moral choices without the grave personal compromise that living through the real events might involve." Critical literacy has often been described as developing knowing readers. That is, readers who perceive the implicit and the explicit ideas, values and attitudes that constitute the architecture of words and images, and out of which texts are constructed. These critical thinking skills and empathetic approach engendered by exposure to quality children's literature will assist our learners as they sail into their future career pathways. To sum up, Margaret Meek writes, "Literacy has two beginnings, one in the world, the other in each person who learns to read and write. As teachers, we are highly indebted to children's writers and illustrators who provide us with a platform for deeper engagement with students. Exposure to children's literature enhances development in imagination, linguistic development, humour, empathy and critical inquiry. And I'm reminded above all about the power of story, irrespective of the medium, to assist readers in developing their navigational skills for participating in an increasingly complex and rapidly changing global environment. Most importantly, I adore the intergenerational connection mediated by children's literature. As a grandparent, I have a lovely time with my 3 grandchildren, sharing many of our locally published books with them. A sincere thank you to all our inspiring, aspiring, and productive writers and illustrators of children's books. To close with the words from Betty Gilderdale, when she was asked what advice she would give to an aspiring writer, and the advice was, you probably know, Read. Yeah. What else do you think? Any ideas? Keep reading. Keep writing. Turn off the telly. And I was really hoping my grandchildren were going to be here that they could hear that last. Thank you very much.